My mother's brother, George, was a sickly person, and I don't know, but I assume he might have had tuberculosis. And some of his friends who had been coming up to Bantam Lake to fish thought it would be a good idea to have him come up here because of the higher elevation, and his breathing might be better. So that's how he happened to arrive. At the same time, my father was building a manufacturing business, and he'd been working hard and long.
And this was in Southington?
In Southington. And so he encouraged my father to come up. So he did, and he came up the rest of his life. The first place they settled was on Marsh Point. The hotel, I think originally that building across from Point Folly was a hotel, and then it became a place for underprivileged women that came up from New York, and then it turned into a place for children who are underprivileged, and that's the part I remember. And I always remember the joyous sounds coming from that camp over there, and because we were right across the little space of water there. She talked about the rowboats that they used to have to get into. Evidently, there was a Mr. Williams that had a fish and tackle business on that, near that hotel somewhere, and he used to rent boats too. So they'd get into the rowboat and row across the lake, and then they pitched a tent and right at Point Folly. There was nothing on that east shore of the Bantam Lake when my parents arrived there. There was a group of men from Southington called the Red Men. Whatever they represented, I don't know, but they came up to the lake. So they were in that area too. But from there all the way down to Camp Wampauset, there was nothing. Sheltering Arms was the only thing around the lake at the time.
And that was the camp or the home for
the kids that became, yeah.
Okay.
So that's how we started coming, and we're coming ever since. And
so you had this incredible next door neighbor in Elaine and May White, these great neighbors.
Yeah.
Of
course, we were nowhere near him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But did you meet him? Did you see
My
him?
father did.
Okay.
Yes, my father did. And my father explained it that you could only lease the land for a year at a time. And he wanted to, I think Elaine White wanted to make sure. He actually, I think, developed this thought for people around, not wealthy people, who wanted a summer vacation. And he would allow them to camp on the property, but they had to behave themselves. And that's why it was a one-year lease. And my brother-in-law here, when they went to lease a piece of land, would not sign the lease because he said no lawyer had ever signed that kind of a lease.
Really? You drove a hard bargain.
So my daughter signed it instead, because she'd been coming here so long, she was pretty sure we wouldn't get thrown off the property. So that's how that had developed, and gradually quite a few people from the Bristol area came up to put tents up along that line. But it was really very primitive at first. We used to have two tents. One was a sleeping tent and one was a cook tent. And and of course we had cots and tents, and that's where we lived for many years. In one way, it hasn't changed very much. In another way, there are changes. A lot more foliage now than there used to be. There's a hill over across the lake up on the north west side. There used to be a meadow.
Yep.
And
Wheeler Hill.
the cows used to graze up,
Yeah.
up there on the hill, and of course that's all covered with foliage. And we used to be able to look right across to Mount Tom, and it was very obvious it was there. And now we can't see it.
Right.
The lake used to be a lot lower than it is now because we had a lot more beach area than there is now. We used to go up to Marsh Point and play up there in the sand all day, and now there's hardly any sand there at all.
There's no television.
No.
There's no internet.
No.
There are no cell phones.
No.
What did a
What did
bunch
we
of
do?
young girls do for fun and frolic on Bantam Lake?
Well, it's kind of amazing. Of course, on our walking up to our tents, there were a series of steps. And I remember we had Victrola, and my sisters were somewhat older than I was, and they would play that Victrola. But they also, the music box down at the other end of the lake was still there. And in those days, the music box was pretty high class. The men had white flannel trousers and dark blue jackets. And I remember my sisters with the curling irons, curling their hair, to get ready to go down the music box, and to bring up their chiffon dresses, get all fixed up to go down the music box. You know, they had a canoe.
Oh.
And they paddled down to the music box.
Incredible.
And it's a long way.
Sure.
And sometimes it was, of course, my poor mother, I think, was worried all the time they were gone, probably. But they had a live band, and they really enjoyed going down there. But sometimes it could be a beautiful night, the fog would come up, and it was hard to find the way back home. But the only thing was there's a huge twin oak tree in front of our cottage, and it was higher than any of the other trees along the road. And so that you could kind of tell where you were supposed to be going by finding where the highest trees were. But other times it was foggy, and that was kind of hard to find the way back. Sometimes my father was good enough to put a lantern down at the end of the dock so they might be able to see. We played a lot of cards, and we did a lot of fishing, of course.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'm looking at your book, and I see a lot of beautiful little drawings. And was that something that you were always gifted as an artist, or was that something that was inspired by living up here and that beautiful tapestry that you made, the hooked rug that you made?
Oh yeah.
Ay,
Oh, yeah.
that's incredible stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Did you know that you had that talent, or did you just one day just pick up a pencil and start drawing?
Yeah. Well, I'm no artist.
Oh, come on now, Helen.
But I don't have. I'm not gifted in art at all. I have to work at it. But I enjoy doing it. I didn't.
Not telling the truth.
I didn't do any painting or anything until after my family was grown, and actually I joined the senior citizens group in my town, and we had a lovely young teacher, and so that's where I got my ability, whatever, to do a little drawing, but it never came easy to me. But as far as that rug is concerned,
Oh,
I
beautiful.
I always wanted to do something and imprint all the things that had happened to us that were important to me. And so I had that in my mind. And I did it. But it took me about 4 years. It's 80 inches long and 40 wide. And so it takes up quite a space. So in '89, we had both of cottages taken down by the tornado.
Right, right.
So they had to, my son and my son-in-law rebuilt both of them. And my youngest daughter said, "Can I have that for my cottage? And I'd like to hang it up." So I said, "Well, you can hang it up, but it can't be walked on. It's got to be on a wall." So she designed her house so it would fit on the wall. So it's a tradition now. It goes up on Memorial Day and comes down on Labor Day.
Your cottages were completely leveled in the tornado in 1981? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And I had just left there about 4 hours before that.
Unbelievable.
And our neighbors were there during the tornado. They saw it coming. The owner and his wife were up there, and he's a very experienced waterman from being along the lake, and he had a sailboat. He went out, he thought the sky looked strange, and he saw the sailboat twisting around.
Oh my.
He said,
Wow.
"Something's wrong." So he dashed back into his house. He and his wife went under the kitchen table, and the house next to his was completely smashed, and there was just a limb went into his house, but he just had bought a new car, and one tree went in front of the car, and one tree in back, so he couldn't go out to tell anybody that we had the problem.
Gee.
So he finally walked out to the road and hailed somebody to let him know what had happened. We lost 23 trees in that tornado and 2 houses. We had snakes, and we did have water moccasins.
How did you feel about snakes? And how did your mother feel about snakes?
Well, none of us were curious about them. No, and they had the big black snakes,
Mm-hmm.
the big black snakes. Not that many, but yeah, you wouldn't want to see one. But we used to worry about water moccasins because they were poisonous.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we used to spend most of our time in the water. But the only thing that I ever remember as far as wildlife were skunks. And we had skunks. And the only time I ever saw a deer, my whole time at the lake, was down between Marsh Point and Camp Wamposset. And it was quite a distance and was down drinking water. Now, practically every time we go in and out of our road,
Right.
there's deer.
Well, because of the habitat changes, it was all farmland
Yeah.
way back when, and
Yeah,
now it's
yeah.
all forest.
Yeah,
So they're everywhere.
and we never had any bears
Right, right.
or coyotes or fox and of course we have raccoons, but I don't think even they're as bad as they used to be. So it's quite a change.
Yeah, huge change.
Yeah.
The old ice house, do you remember that at all?
Oh, I remember that well. My father and I, my father eventually needed a boat. We got out of the rowboat stage. So he went down along the shore and bought a big boat. I mean, like nothing ever ever was on Bantam Lake before. It was a very wide, flat bottom boat and long. And it had a marine engine in the middle on the floor and seats around both sides. And so we used to have to, after we got through the Mr. Williams stage where they used to get fishing tackle, there were the Dempsey brothers, and they had a store and a pier and a place to buy fishing tackle over on the west side of the lake. So we needed a boat to get across from one side to the other. And so that's what we used to go back and forth. And I remember it well. He used to cover it, of course, with canvas, but sometimes it have an extra hard storm, some water get into the boat. So I used to love to go with my father, uncover the boat. Of course, we had to row out. We had to tie the boat out some distance from the land. So we needed a rowboat to get into the boat. So I would go with my father, and I remember he had some kind of a pump, and it was a brass pump, not quite shiny, and I thought that was quite something. And so I would help pump the boat out, and of course I thought that was great. And then we would sometimes had a problem starting the engine. You know, the spark plugs would get a little damp, so we'd have to wipe off the spark plugs, and finally my father would twirl the wheel around, and finally we'd get going. We'd chug across the lake. It was quite a little distance, and so that's what we navigated back and forth. We'd park our car at Dempsey's and take all our belongings and put them in the boat. Yeah, so, yeah.
Did you ever go into Litchfield itself and
no,
shop or go to a hotel?
No. By that time, more people. My sister and the oldest one. I remember her talking about taking the train from Bantam to Litchfield, but I never. So in order to get groceries, we would get in the rowboat, row across to Point Folly, and then we'd walk into Bantam.
Oh.
My mother and some of her friends and us kids, of course, we thought that was a wonderful thing. So at that time, Bantam was a pretty small little place. And as I remember, there was a general store there where they sold overalls and pails and axe and stuff like that, which is now where that fancy restaurant is.
Okay.
And they had an A&P store there. And I was quite amazed that somebody, of course, cans of things were packed up, you know, all tight. And there was a fellow that worked there, and he had this big, long pole, and it had catches on the end of it, and he could reach up and pull the cans off the wall. And I thought that was quite something. So then we'd get the groceries, and I don't remember ever carrying a bag or anything, I don't know. But we kids used to like to, there was a farm along the way, and we used to love to go into the orchard and pick up apples, thinking we were getting a big deal, you know. Of course, most of them were rotten. So then we walk home back to the lake and across the lake. And that was a big adventure. So.
Helen, do you remember when the ice house burned down in 1929? Do you remember that?
I don't remember the date, but I definitely remember the night.
You do?
Oh,
Could
yes.
you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, you know, usually everything's quiet on the lake at night, and I happened to wake up, and I guess other members of my family did too. And the sky was all pink, and well, what's going on? So, of course, we dashed down to the dock, looked up where all the pink sky was, and it was a firehouse on fire. And it was quite a big thing at the time.
Sure.
It was a huge
Huge
ice
building.
house. My father and I used to go up to get the ice, you know, because we had ice boxes.
Right.
And so he'd get the ice tongs, and I'd follow him along, and we'd chug up to the ice house. And I was just probably 8 or 9 years old.
During the summer, was the ice house must have been quiet, right? Or was there a lot of noise coming there? Winter, obviously, was when it was going to be a racket.
I remember going into that place, and it was huge. Of course, I was little, but nevertheless, and the ice was stacked up, and all load of sawdust all over everything. And of course, it was all wet, because I suppose it was just to absorb the water that came melting ice. And it was a big place. And to me, it was enormous. And of course, they supplied New York City with a lot of ice, so it had to be pretty big. And doing some of my research when I first moved up here about 10 years ago, I used to love to go to the museums and the libraries and read as much as I could about the old days. And one of the things I read was that some of the Irish immigrants used to come up and work in the ice house, but they almost froze to death because they didn't have the proper clothes.
Right.
That's incidental, but it was quite a sight to see. And nobody ever seemed to know what caused it. I don't think they do to this day.
Well, I think they thought it was ultimately spontaneous combustion because of the heat of the summer and the sawdust is wet.
Yeah.
And that happens. Did you, when it burned down the next day, did you take your father take your boat over there to take a look at?
No, we didn't. No, I don't ever remember going back.
I can't even imagine how huge.
Yeah, it was
that
a
fire
huge
must have been.
fire. Yeah, it was. It lit up the whole area.
When you came up in the summer, and obviously through the boat you brought provisions, but you said you did a lot of fishing. Did you eat a lot of fish out of the lake?
Oh, we did. As kids, we had these galvanized pails, and we'd get in the boat. We'd pull the white perch and the yellow perch out and fill the pails.
How did your mother prepare the food? How did she prepare the fish? Did she pan fry the fish?
Well, no, we did. We learned how to clean the fish. We didn't care about it, but we did it. My father taught us, I suppose. But we cleaned the fish and ate them.
Did you fry them pan fry?
Yeah,
Oh,
pan
nice.
fried. Yeah, of course they had a lot of bones.
Bones,
in
yeah,
them.
perch were
Yeah.
very bony.
But they did have. I was never crazy about them, but they were edible. And of course, we did everything in the cooking camp, which was a kerosene stove, and so we ate well. But I don't know, as kids, you don't think much about it. But
Did you pick blueberries?
oh,
or
we
pick
used
apples?
to, yes, yes, we did. And there was 2 bachelors in the tent next to us. They're pretty quiet guys, but they fished a lot, and they always brought in pickerel and good fish. So we used to love to go and find crawfish for them,
Oh.
Yes, we did. We turned, run around. Of course, then, as I said, we the water line was lower, and we had a lot of rock piles. So we'd go into the rock piles and, turn the. You have to be quick, turn the stones over to get them because they're very quick. But so we used to do a lot of that, and of course we loved doing that. And then we used to roll around a lot and go over on the west side of the lake, and of course where the water lilies are. And there used to be a lot of water lilies there at the time. And we used to pick big bouquets, bring them back to my mother. Of course, we did a lot of swimming, and we used to have nice bonfires on weekends, and we kids would scurry around and pick up all the twigs and brush and get ready for the bonfire. Then we'd sit on the side of the hill, old and young, and sing. And my mother and my aunt both had good voices, and they knew a lot of songs. So then we'd toast marshmallows, and that was a big
Did you
deal.
make your own marshmallows?
Pardon me?
Did you make your own marshmallows?
Oh,
or
no.
Did you buy them?
No,
Still
no,
buy them?
no.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
I was reading in your book about your mother giving food to tramps and hobos that were
yes.
coming through. Could you tell us about that? That's interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course, I don't remember too much about that. What was the man they called him? I don't know. There was one man that roamed around the state.
The Leatherman.
The weatherman.
Oh,
Yes, and he came by.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And but
He's an icon.
there were other tramps that came by. I remember my mother. She'd feed them, but she'd put them on the back steps. I remember that myself. There were a lot of people roaming around, but nobody ever feared them, I don't think.
Right.
Like you might today.
Right.
You
Sure.
know,
Sure.
she was a do-gooder. Yeah, she liked to help people.
That's wonderful.
So I had wonderful parents. There were happy days, and of course, then when my children came along, they all loved to come, and now the grandchildren come, the great-grandchildren. So it's
wonderful to have that.
we have, and even it's an amazing thing is that people that our children married, like married into other families, and they like to come. So they're all around the lake trying to scout for property,
Right.
but there's not too much available. Yeah. So.
In the very beginning of our talk, you were talking about the sounds of other children from the cities coming up.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Those children were brought here by Elaine.
Elaine White. Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about your feelings about him?
I admired him. I mean, I never knew him, of course, but he was so ahead of his time. You'd never think of having to preserve land, but he did. He was a visionary, I think, way ahead of his time, and very kind, I think, person must have been for all the things he did. So we're also grateful because Bantam Lake could never be like it is now if it weren't for him. I mean, there's so much of the area that you just can't build too much on. They're very restrictive of what you can do and what you can't do. But, if that property was all available, it'd be probably high rises and everything else up there.
Sure.
Of course, I used to wait for 4th of July, and the fireworks, of course, they weren't that much at that time, but to me, they were great, seeing them come out over the lake, and we look forward to that. And it was just We used to go over to Sandy Beach a lot. Sandy Beach was used a lot in those days. And not too many people go there anymore. Although I have some great-grandchildren that live in Tampa and have been pretty much around a lot of nice places. And they love Sandy Beach. When they come up, and my granddaughter brings them up from Tampa, and they stay about a month at a time, and they love coming up here. So, you know, it appeals to so many people.
How old are you?
I'm 100.
You're 100. And how many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren do you have?
I had 6 children and 26 grandchildren.
Ooh.
And 40 great-grandchildren. So you understand now.
Christmas has got to be pretty tough, Helen.
You understand now why we congregate, but we still have good times, happy times up there. Just wonderful. Sounds like
and continues.
Continues, yeah.